This video is for commentary and analysis under fair use. The views expressed are my own, based on publicly available information and my interpretation of it.
What if Dominic Russo was never treated as simply Mackenzie Shirilla's boyfriend? Was Dom ever truly free to leave? For anyone unfamiliar with the case, Mackenzie Shirilla was convicted of murdering her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend Davion Flanagan after driving into a brick building at nearly 100 miles per hour in Strongsville, Ohio in July 2022. She was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life. Hi, this is Stina. Welcome to Motive and Method. My degree and background are in communication, both practice and analysis. And on this channel, I look closely at language, framing, behavioral patterns, contradictions, and the stories people construct around criminal cases. I'm not a psychologist and I'm not an attorney. I'm also not diagnosing anyone in this video. I am examining the documented behavior, the words spoken by people involved, and the patterns those words may reveal. Before we begin, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with anyone who may be interested, and let me know what you think in the comments. Channel memberships are also open for anyone who would like to support the work I'm doing here. Today, I want to focus on one very specific part of the Mackenzie Shirilla case, the role Dominic Russo may have been expected to play in Mackenzie's life, not just as her boyfriend, but possibly as her emotional stabilizer. A few weeks before the crash, Dom made a video with his phone of Mackenzie demanding to be let inside his house. Take a look.
5, 4. Dom, if you do not open, you think I'm joking. You think I'm joking. Like, I'm dead ass.
What stands out to me here is not simply that Mackenzie was upset. People become upset during relationship conflict all the time. That alone is not remarkable. What is remarkable is Mackenzie's apparent inability to accept that Dom had the right to say no. He did not want her inside. He made that clear several times. That should have ended the matter. But to Mackenzie, access to Dom appears to have been something she felt she had to obtain, regardless of what Dom wanted. This was not merely, please talk to me, or even begging him to talk to her. It was an escalation because he would not give her what she wanted. And that distinction matters, because in healthy relationships, another person is allowed to withdraw. They're allowed to end the conversation. They're allowed to go home. They are also allowed to lock the door and not let you inside. And they are allowed to end the relationship altogether, which is what Dom had been trying to do many times the month of the crash, and even earlier in the year. Dom repeatedly appeared to be trying to create distance from Mackenzie, and Mackenzie repeatedly appeared unwilling to allow that distance to exist. That is interesting all on its own. Now, listen to how Natalie Shirilla describes Dom and his relationship with her daughter on the Cuomo interview.
There was none of that. Like, I knew that he was going to take care of her, like, keep her safe, and he was very protective of her.
He would keep her safe. Safe from what, exactly? Was Natalie simply saying Dom would make sure Mackenzie got home safely? That he would protect her from other people? That he was dependable? Or did keeping her safe have another meaning within this family? Because Mackenzie had a documented history of threatening self-harm. There had already been a police visit involving concern that she might harm herself. There were serious emotional crises. There were destructive outbursts. And, as we will hear later, relationship conflict involving Dom appears to have intersected with at least one earlier crisis. That changes how I hear the phrase. When Natalie says Dom would keep Mackenzie safe, I have to wonder whether Dom had become the person the family trusted to calm her, contain her, pick her up after crises, and prevent her from spiraling. In other words, was Dom being treated not simply as Mackenzie's boyfriend, but as a part of Mackenzie's emotional safety plan? And actually, I would say the biggest part of her emotional safety plan. Natalie has also spoken publicly about her involvement in Mackenzie and Dom's relationship. And I'm just going to say it plainly here. Her level of involvement gives me the creeps a little bit. We're talking about her 17-year-old daughter and a very young boyfriend who is only a few years older. Most relationships of that age do not end in marriage and happily ever after. They involve arguments, separations, reconciliations, growth, and often, eventually, moving on. But Natalie did not describe herself as merely listening when her daughter was heartbroken. She described helping Mackenzie and Dom work through their relationship problems as something she valued. And then, in a message dated July 1st, only weeks before the crash, Natalie wrote directly to Dom. Her message said, and I quote, "I tried to call. You don't have to call me back. I was just thinking about you guys. One of my favorite things to do is watch you guys grow and navigate through your problems together. They're not always fun and it's not always easy. But the point is that you guys grow a little more each time and learn a little bit more about yourselves and each other." On its surface, that sounds encouraging, but I think we need to stop and examine what Natalie is actually saying. One of her favorite things to do was watch this young couple navigate their problems together. That wording suggests she had taken on an ongoing role in the maintenance of their relationship. She was not standing entirely outside of it. She had become part of the process, perhaps even integral to the process. And this message was sent at a time when the relationship appears to have been deteriorating. Evidence and messages leading up to the crash suggest that Dom had repeatedly tried to end the relationship and that Mackenzie would not accept it. So, why was Natalie so invested in helping them remain together and keep working through every conflict? Was she simply an over-involved mother? Or did she believe that a breakup could produce a dangerous emotional crisis in her daughter? When we put these pieces together, a disturbing possibility emerges. Natalie says Dom would keep Mackenzie safe. Natalie involves herself in helping them repair and maintain their relationship. Mackenzie reacts intensely when Dom refuses to let her into his house. And Mackenzie had a history of threats, emotional crises, and possible self-harm tied to conflict and rejection. That raises a question. Did the family begin relying on Dom to regulate Mackenzie? Was Dom expected to calm her down, take her away from conflict at home? Was he expected to pick her up when she was spiraling? Was he expected to keep answering the phone, opening the door, reconciling after arguments, and keep the relationship intact because everyone was afraid of what Mackenzie might do if he finally walked away? In fact, Dom's brother told the police she continually threatened self-harm if Dom broke up with her. That is an enormous burden to place on another person. And Dom was a young man trying to navigate an unstable and increasingly volatile relationship. This, to me, is one of the most important questions in the entire relationship. Was Dom emotionally free to leave? Legally and morally, of course, he could leave her anytime he wanted. But emotionally, did he believe he could end the relationship without something terrible happening? If one person repeatedly threatens self-harm, becomes destructive, arrives at the other person's home, refuses to accept separation, or communicates that the other person is responsible for keeping them alive, that creates an impossible emotional trap. The other person may remain in the relationship not because they want to, but because they are terrified of what will happen if they leave. Whether anyone intended it or not, the emotional message from Mackenzie and from Natalie, apparently, can become, "You cannot leave her. Look at what she might do." Now, I cannot say for certain that Natalie consciously placed that burden of responsibility on Dom, but her own language suggests she saw Dom as someone who could keep Mackenzie safe. And her involvement in preserving the relationship suggests that maintaining that relationship mattered to her far beyond ordinary parental encouragement. And there is another conversation that may help explain why Natalie viewed the relationship this way. In a jail call, Mackenzie and Natalie discuss an earlier police visit, what Natalie dismissively calls the quote-unquote suicide visit.
Besides, that call, Kenzie, was from 2020. It was so long ago, too. I'm like, really, guys?
Oh, me and Dom arguing?
No, when they came to the house for the quote-unquote suicide visit.
I know, I remember that. Dom came to get me. Like later that.
Kenzie, I'm not talking about anything right now. Don't say anything about the call or any.
Mackenzie initially refers to herself and Dom arguing. Natalie identifies the incident as the visit involving concern over suicide. Then Mackenzie begins to say that Dom came to get her later that day. That exchange appears to connect the earlier crisis, the concern about self-harm and conflict involving Dom. The relationship with Dom appears to have been intertwined with Mackenzie's emotional crises long before the crash. Now, the school records also suggest Mackenzie was experiencing serious conflict with her parents and discussing moving out once she turned 18, possibly with very limited contact afterward. At some point, Mackenzie was spending extensive time with Dom and appears, at least periodically, to have been staying at his home. Again, she was 17 years old, and I have to ask whether her parents allowed that situation because they believed Dom could keep her calmer and safer than they could. Perhaps they feared that trying to stop her would produce another explosion. If Dom could settle her down, give her somewhere else to stay, or prevent her from escalating at home, letting Mackenzie remain attached to him may have seemed like the easier or safer option. But that does not mean it was fair to Dom. It may simply mean the family solved one problem by transferring it onto a young man who appeared to be making repeated efforts to end the relationship. By the time of the crash, the evidence indicates that the relationship had grown much worse. Dom had repeatedly tried to leave. Mackenzie repeatedly resisted. There were threats, accusations, emotional pressure, rage, and extreme language between them. And only weeks before the crash, Natalie was still messaging Dom about watching the two of them grow and navigate through their problems together. That message tells me Natalie knew they were having serious problems. She did not describe the relationship as ending. She described it as something they needed to continue working through. And that is where the line between support and interference becomes very troubling. Because sometimes the healthiest thing two young people can do is end a relationship. Not every conflict needs to be repaired, and not every couple should remain together. And another person's fear, rage, threats, or emotional instability cannot eliminate someone's right to leave. So, what led up to the crash? Cell phone evidence presented during the case indicated that Mackenzie's phone had been in the area of the industrial park before the crash, even though there appeared to be no ordinary reason for it to be there. The prosecution used that evidence to argue that the location may have been considered in advance. What we do not know is exactly what was said inside the car during the final drive. We do not know whether Dom told Mackenzie she would not be staying with him on their drive home or shortly before their drive home. And we do not know whether he made it clear the relationship was over or whether the flare-up was something involving Davion. But if some final rejection occurred inside that car, it would not exist in a vacuum. It would exist against a documented background of escalating conflict, repeated attempts by Dom to leave, Mackenzie refusing to accept separation, and Natalie helping the couple navigate their problems. And an emotional trigger inside the car would not necessarily contradict evidence that the location had been visited earlier. Advanced consideration and an immediate emotional trigger can exist at the same time. One may explain the opportunity, the other may explain the moment. And we know that leading up to the crash, Dom had increasingly made attempts to break up with Mackenzie, but she was having none of it. After the crash, Dom could no longer occupy the role of keeping Mackenzie safe, and her parents appear to have taken over that function completely. They soothe her, redirect her, and they appear deeply afraid of what may happen if Mackenzie fully understands the reality of her circumstances. That post-conviction pattern will be the focus of my upcoming live stream. But I now believe the pattern may have begun long before Mackenzie entered prison. Natalie's words leave us with a question that I believe deserves far more attention. When she said Dom would keep Mackenzie safe, was she simply describing a loving and protective boyfriend? Or was she revealing the responsibility that had gradually been placed on him? So, let me know what you guys think in the comments. When Natalie said that Dom would keep Mackenzie safe, what do you believe she meant? Do you think Natalie was merely being supportive of the relationship, or had Dom become the person everyone relied upon to manage Mackenzie when she became emotionally overwhelmed? Please keep the discussion thoughtful and respectful toward Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan and their families. And as always, please like, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member if you would like to support more analysis like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.